Okay, ayah number 5, inshallah.
Ayah number 5 of Surah.
Surah An Nisa.
Surah An Nisa, inshallah. Okay.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ولا تأتوا السفهاء أموالكم التي جعل الله لكم قياما وارزقوهم فيها واكسوهم وقولوا لهم قولا معروفا. So this ayah basically is a continuation of the same subject in essence. Subject matter has to do with two things. That is, one are the people who are responsible for taking care of anyone who may be weaker than them. That is to say that they don't have the same capacity or ability or even the same status in society to be able to take care of themselves. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us certain commandments in regards to their caretaking. And the second has to do, of course, with the means wherewith we all are able to take care of ourselves and others, that is our wealth. So that's, in essence, really how this sort of starts and kind of ends. And everything in between is, if you will, subsidiary to those two main topics. So one is that in any society, we will have a situation where there will be people who are weaker, and it is the duty of those who are stronger, quote unquote, to maintain and take care of those who are weaker than them. And the second is that in any society too, there is a distribution of wealth. Oftentimes that distribution, unfortunately, it falls into the hands of the strong and usually is not given to the weaker or the weak amongst people. But also there's an aspect here too of being able to take care of and manage your wealth in an intelligent way. There's actually a hadith that's related to the Prophet ﷺ, who some have criticized its sanad. Nonetheless, it's a very fitting hadith, and its meaning is definitely sound, where the Prophet ﷺ was reported to have said, al-iqtisadu fi nifqati nisf al-ma'isha, that being balanced in your spending is half of your earning and half of your livelihood. So al-iqtisad means to be smart and to be balanced in how you spend your money. And in this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said this is half of your livelihood, meaning ma'isha literally means how you live day to day, taking care of your needs and the needs of those who you're responsible for. So if you want to know how to live so that all your needs are taken care of and those who you are responsible for, then you should learn iqtisad. So, it's not just about studying economy and how it works, the economy and how it works. It's also about developing good spending habits, literally developing good spending habits so that a person is able to use their wealth appropriately and wisely. So part of that is also included here, because wealth is considered to be a blessing also, of course, from Allah, but it is a responsibility. It is a way that we can attain for ourselves much good in this world and the akhirah if it's spent properly. And a person who is able to learn how to use their wealth for their benefit in the hereafter is actually the person who spends their wealth in the best way possible. So even the things that we may think are mundane and have nothing to do per se with our akhirah also becomes actually in reality a part of the things we do for reward in the akhirah. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us obligations. Anyone who knows the definition of a faridah or an obligation, okay, in Islamic law, understands that obligations are imposed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon his servants, but his servants are rewarded for them. And furthermore, what's even more beautiful about this is that the obligation is rewarded more than any other act. So an act, for instance, that is from the Sunnah. And if you remember last time we met, we kind of talked about the definition of Sunnah and how, according to its usage, it may imply different things. But when we say Sunnah in the Sharia, there's a very specific ruling and category of our actions that are called Sunnah. By definition, it means something that is not the same as an obligation, a faridah, or something that's fard, but yet it was still done by the Prophet ﷺ assiduously. Ma wadaba alayh. So something that the Prophet ﷺ used to do assiduously or continuously, only leaving at certain times, ahyanan, like every once in a while, maybe he would not do that act. Okay, so that because of that, the definition of a sunnah, especially if it's emphasized, mu'akkada, is an act in which you should do it, all right, but it's not at the same level of a fard or faridah, because you are allowed to leave that act from time to time. However, it's important to note here that leaving the act altogether to completely abandon a sunnah actually becomes sinful. Hopefully that's clear. But a fard or a faridah is something that is an obligation and that there is no time. And that's, of course, that obligation is conditional, excuse me, like fasting in Ramadan. There's only a certain time in which you can do it. But anyhow, regardless of that, that's a different subject. A faridah is something that you must do. And one of the important definitions of it too is this, is that the faridah is rewarded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when you do it, even though it is a command of Allah and it is something Allah has obliged his servants to do, but you are rewarded for it. And also the reward for a faridah or a fard act is more than, for instance, say something in the sunnah. So although the sunnah is not as important in its emphasis, but the reality is the fard, being that it's almost like, if you can say, it seems to defy a certain amount of logic, because one would assume if you are obliged to do something, then even one would assume, for instance, if the government obliged you to pay your taxes or whatever, they oblige you, it's law now, you must do it, nobody's exempt. No one would expect the government to reward you for doing it, because it's your obligation, you're obliged, right? And that you would be rewarded for doing something that is above and beyond the call of duty. But here we see that the mercy of Allah is such that when he makes something an obligation, then he also rewards us, and he rewards us greater than doing things that we did, for instance, that are not an obligation, like a sunnah or something that's mustahab, which is even more, it's something you do of your own volition. Because a mustahab act is something by definition, again, you're not obliged at all, it's not even emphasized, but it's good to do. So if you do it, you get rewarded. And a mustahab is not equivalent to a fard act in reward. So this is the mercy of Allah. So going back to the topic. So the idea of earning wealth, to earn wealth and to acquire wealth actually becomes a faridah. So according to the hadith, kasbul halali faridatun ba'da farida, that the earning of wealth that is halal, that is permissible in Islamic law, of course, is an obligation after other obligation. And of course, now it becomes an obligation according to the person's status. And that is all explained here in this surah as well. Status meaning, for instance, frankly speaking, a male, Muslim male who reaches maturity actually has an obligation to provide for themselves. If they become a grown, if they reach the age of maturity, the obligation upon that male is to earn for themselves. Just in the same vein, in this ayah, we see that it is said to give literally the foolish, sufaha. Don't give them their wealth that you have been given a responsibility for, but rather provide for them from that wealth and clothe them from that wealth and say to them a good word. So here what's being spoken about is, again, the idea that if you are taking care of someone, regardless of who that person is, that they don't have anyone else to take care of. So you have assumed responsibility, like an orphan, okay? So they have money, they have wealth that has been, for instance, bequeathed by their parents. So if they reach the age of maturity and they're still not able to understand the affairs of money and how to spend money, then you can keep that wealth from them and not give it to them to a particular age. Now, there's obviously differences of opinions amongst the fuqaha about this particular issue. How long do you wait? Can you wait? What can you give? Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah had the opinion even up to the age of 25, that a person, in other words, even up until that age, can still be very immature and unaware of how to spend money. And a person who's their caretaker, if they feel that way, that they're not savvy enough, so to speak, to be given that amount of wealth, then they can keep it from them until that age. The idea being, though, a normal person, quote unquote, who reaches the age of maturity, then that is the age of responsibility. So it means that if they did have wealth that was given to them, and that they didn't have it because of this, because they're, for instance, haven't reached maturity, in this case, you know, someone else is taking care of them, they're an orphan. By the time they reach puberty, that is what we mean by maturity, if they become baligh, it's assumed that they should be mature enough that they can have complete ownership over their own wealth. Just like in the Sharia, as I just said, when a man reaches maturity or becomes baligh or hits puberty, it should be, and it's assumed in the Sharia, that they are mature enough now to take care of themselves, which is an interesting point, perhaps a little off subject, but it should be something we kind of pay attention to. Look, no matter how society changes, no matter what society does and its expectations, for instance, like in this society, you can reach maturity, let's say for a male, at the age of 13. At the age of 13, they're either just starting high school, or they could still possibly still be in middle school. They have at least a good 8, if not sometimes, if they're becoming a doctor, another 12 years ahead of them, and even more sometimes, actually, of schooling to do. So it's almost like they're sufaha. You can't give them any responsibility or put them in the real world until they're 25 and up, where the Sharia looks at it differently, because the Sharia is based on a biological, like in a will, exactly. Parents pass away, they're orphans, for instance, their uncle takes care of them, and they have money left over to in their will that's bequeathed to them. So what I mean to say is that in the Sharia, we say someone who is baligh, who has reached puberty, is mature, so they are mukallaf, not just in a spiritual way, because most of us understand that mukallaf means, of course, which it does, someone is morally obliged to follow the Sharia. For instance, someone hits puberty, now it becomes obligatory for them to pray 5 times a day. It becomes a faridah and obligatory for them to fast in Ramadan, mathalan, fahanuma jarra, and so forth and so on, which is true. But also even in a social way, that now the obligations of these issues of earning and so forth and so on, and being an active member in society, it also changes. This is why the society itself that we live in now, for all the things you could say for or against it, it's almost a retardation of maturity and growth. It's simple as this. Biologically, and I have to be extremely frank, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you the ability to reproduce, it means that you should be mentally mature enough to reproduce. Okay, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decided that you are now old enough to have children of your own, biologically speaking, it means that you should be mature enough and sensible enough to do so. Of course, we know that's not true at all nowadays. Again, like we wait until people are 25 before they're even considered to be mature enough to take care of themselves. But that's actually a retardation. That shouldn't be something we consider as a goal. We should actually consider it as almost, like I said, a type of retardation that you're giving people. And some people, even outside of Islam, have noticed this about our society and have criticized it. You're almost giving people like an eternal youth, right? Like they just become children and they remain children. We still call them bacha. And they're teenagers. Teenagers are not children. We shouldn't give them this idea that they're just free to do whatever they want and that they're just too young yet to think about serious matters. The reality is, according to the Sharia, they're old enough to have children. Again, biologically. Just think about that for a second. Biologically, they're old enough to bring other lives into this world. That means that should be mature enough mentally and in their actions that they should be able to take care of themselves and others. If they're not, just think about this ayah, what they're called, sufaha. Sufaha is the plural of safi. Safi means like to be very impolite. It literally means, it's a very strong word in Arabic. It's like saying idiot almost, the equivalent of that in English. It's like saying a person is an imbecile. Maybe that's a little bit more polite. So there's a reason for that too, is that ulama explained why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would use such strong language and call people sufaha. And in that they said it's literally istihzan, and it is almost like a belittling of these kind of people, that if they're not mature enough and smart enough to handle their own affairs, they're behaving like sufaha, like imbeciles. Think about that for just a second. The ideal is that when someone hits puberty, there should be a little bit of maturity in them, that they are able to handle themselves. They are able to take care of their own affairs. If it was another society, different time, different place, you would see that at that age, they are able to handle themselves. I mean, Osama ibn Zayd anhu was leading armies at that age. Let's think about that for a second. You know, they had great responsibilities and they were men, literally, by the time they reached their teens. So we should think twice sometimes about how we raise our children. We understand that the way our society goes in our life, like I said, they have a lot of schooling to go through, and they have a lot of years ahead of them where they'll probably be in school. But that doesn't mean you can't take the spirit of the Sharia and inculcate in them at that time and in that age, when they become, literally, they hit puberty, they are mubaligh, they are mukallaf, inculcate in them certain values and certain work ethics to make them mature. Otherwise, what you're doing, as Imam Abu Hanifa interpreted this here, all of the above. That's exactly what I'm saying. The maturity, it implies all of the above, physically, mentally, and like I said, their ethics and their actions, because the primary, the thing that I was trying to impress here upon from this ayah and from the fuqaha, the idea is once a person hits puberty, they are a grown man or woman, which the implication is that both from a spiritual side, mentally, they have to obey Allah. They are now obliged to, for instance, pray salah as a very simple example. And what does that imply? By making salah, it means by now they should know all the ahkam of salah. So mentally, they should be mature enough to know what is tahara, what is purity, what is ritual purity. When do I have to take a ghusl? When do I have to make wudu? What are the obligations? Even if I'm traveling, how do I find qibla? How do I determine the times of salah? All of that should be in the mind of a man or woman. And we're going to use that word to get rid of this idea again, like this eternal youth, that they're just teenagers. We've actually made a whole nother category, from childhood to teenagers to like young professionals. No, once they hit maturity, when you're thinking by the Sharia standards, they're a grown man and woman. So not only are their actions written against them, meaning it's no longer on the parents' shoulders what they do or don't do, but they're responsible for knowing these things as well. Just like I explained, and so that's a mental maturity in terms of their deen, and also in terms of that, which is part of deen as well, but their earning and their ability to take care of themselves. Again, this is a ruling of the Sharia. again, not talking about the standards of society. A person, like a man who reaches maturity, who becomes baligh, who reaches puberty, technically speaking, it is no longer the obligation of his father to spend for him, technically speaking. Now, I know a lot of fathers might like to hear that, but yeah, but yeah, I mean, it might not be wise policy, because we know that, again, it's just the way the society is set up that you might not be able to do that. But technically,
Imam, doesn't some of this though go hand in hand? Like in Islam, correct me if I'm wrong, you can't have a family or have children until you have some type of economic or financial independence.
right. But that's two separate issues, because one thing is that a person being ready.
But isn't a little bit of a moot point if you live in a society where there is no way you can have any type of economic independence, right? This society, the way the schooling system is built, there's no way you can have any type, even getting a job. You
Well,
can't.
yeah, I was going to get to that point. It's kind of what I was alluding to, that it's a good idea to try within whatever framework that you're in to train your children to at least be at that age mature enough to be able to take care of themselves. Okay, and you can do that in different ways. As an example, while they're in school, obviously they're probably not going to be able, they're not obviously going to be able to work a full-time job, but it's not a bad idea to teach your teenage boys how to hold a part-time job on the weekends, for instance, even if you are the one who hires them and gives them a salary for doing certain things, whatever it may be. It doesn't matter, you know, that's up to the discretion of the parent. Everyone's different, but it's not a bad idea to start them off young, because what I see in our communities often is, again, because of this, we feel that all they need to do is their schoolwork. And, you know, again, like we have the attitude, like others do too, is like this eternal youth idea that they should just, you know, not worry about anything except getting good grades. But there should be something there that instills in them the idea that they are technically, according to Sharia, grown-ups, and they need to learn a little bit of self-sufficiency. Okay, they may not be able to, because of that same situation, because of the schooling they have to go through and the financial independence, you know, it may not come until some time. They may not be able to get married right away and have children. That's a different issue, but they need to have to be trained to become that type of the maturity we're talking about, like you said, spiritual, mental, physical. There has to be a way to raise our children to be that, because what we're seeing now in the community is exactly what I'm saying. We see people who are still children by the time they're 25. Like Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah said, according to this ayah, that his definition of sufaha are people that even up until 25, they don't have a clue about what to do when it comes to earning and spending. It's specifically here, of course, spending money, because this is wealth they inherit, but they don't have a clue about what to do with money, so they shouldn't be given it. We don't want our children to be like that, because those people are called in this ayah sufaha. You see, they're imbeciles. They don't have a clue, right? So that shouldn't be the case. We shouldn't make our children like that. We should make them mature when they are mature, when the biological, right, reality kicks in. It is a sign from Allah that they are now actually grown men and women, and we should treat them as such, even if they have to do, obviously, a lot more schooling is ahead of them, a lot more is going to come before they have their own families. Allah knows best, but they have to be mature enough to at least think like a man or a woman, and to behave like one. Even if you have to give them a salary, it doesn't matter. And watch what they do. Watch how they handle a bank account, for instance. Watch how they spend their money and do certain. I've seen people, by the way, I'm not going to give names, obviously, but I've known people who I grew up with who, mashallah, took Shahada along with me after high school. But I remember in my high school days, their father was wealthy. They did have money, but the father would not spoil them. And actually, he used to work part-time jobs on the weekends to be able to do things like buy things for his car and buy a car even, and jackets and clothes. Like, it instilled in him a certain amount of maturity, like that kind of attitude, that the father basically told him, my financial support is for things like when you go to college, right? But it's not for those things. You have to learn how to do that on your own. That's a simple example of how we can make our children a little bit more mature. not just spoiling to the nth degree and giving them everything they want and making them feel that they can just rely upon us for everything. Make them self-reliant people. And that's the idea of qiyaman here. This word that's coming up, qiyaman, is actually from, for instance, it's actually, qiyam is a root word of qama yaqumu, which means to stand. There's a lot of words you may have heard before that are derivatives of it, like the word of Allah, the name of Allah himself, Al-Qayyum, which means that he is the one who upholds and sustains all things. No, again, it's not mentally challenged, like, you know, a person who has a very serious mental disease. It is literally people who are fine and sound, yani sound body and mind, but they just have no clue of how to use money. It literally means that, according to all the mufassirun, all the exegetes of the Quran explain it as that has nothing to do with a particular mental disease, or I don't know, I don't think it's PC anymore to say that, but you know, like mental retardation, like they actually do, they have sound intellect, they just don't have a clue about how to use money, bottom line. That you fear if you give them money, a large lump sum total, that they're going to waste it and they won't spend it wisely, and they'll end up basically without anything. So that's what's meant specifically. And so it does kind of allude to the fact that what I'm saying, that people should be trained, even at an early age. Like they become mature, they're mature according to Sharia. They should know how to save money, how to spend money. As the hadith says, al-iqtisadu fi nafaqa, to be able to do that, to learn how to spend your money properly and to use your money properly is half of your living. And so they should be trained from a very early age. I don't know, maybe I'm different, but even when I was a teen, we learned how to sign checks, for instance. Those are different days. I guess nobody does that much anymore, but these are important things. Just a simple thing like that. How do you sign a check? How do you open an account, right? Where should you be giving your priorities when it comes to your money? That should be things that we should instill in people. And I know even today, frankly speaking, I know that if we go back to Pakistan, we will see certain places and villages and towns, I've seen it with my own eyes, where if the man he has a shop, for instance, a grocery store or something like that, when the man is gone, I've seen this, there's 11 or 12-year-old boy there taking care of the customers and taking orders and things like that. That impressed me because where in America would you be able to find 11 or 12-year-old who would be able to be that mature? And I remember the look on his face too, like he was serious, like he's a man. He can handle this, right? He can take orders and take it. It was impressive from that respect. Now, one would argue, yeah, that's because there people don't have a choice, but that's not the point. The point being is that you can train people that young to be smart enough to handle numbers, to be smart enough to handle money, to be smart enough to do things like that. Even if we can't do it to that extent, but to some extent within our parameters and what we're used to in this society, you have to be able to train, because this does not mean people, sufaha does not mean people who are, there's a word for that, atul, in Arabic. Okay, someone who's actually what they would call mentally retarded or has a mental disease, there's a word for that, and sufaha is not it. Sufaha simply means that you have intellect, but you're not using it properly. And also, of course, by the way, what Rasulullah said, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, according to hadith of Sahih Muslim, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is destined everything all the way up and until also the intellect. So there's no doubt, even if you're not mentally retarded, quote unquote, so to speak, the intellect has different degrees. Like we're not all as smart as one another. Some people are smarter than others. So when we mean intellect, there is, if you could say, a kind of standard, what they call common sense in English, that every human being should have, right? Common sense, at least what they mean by that is a person should not act like a fool, where the word aql really comes from, which is to tie down your camel. What that means is that you should not be so foolish as to put yourself into deliberate danger. Common sense of every human person that all of us should share, whether our intellects are at a different level, is that we're not foolish enough to put ourselves into deliberate danger. And hence the word here is yud sufaha. Because although a person may have intellect, but they're not in terms of strictly speaking monetary issues. They behave like fools. They behave like people who don't know what to do, so they end up squandering all their wealth. Does that make sense?
Yes. Imam, so you touched a little bit on it, as challenging as the economic and financial independence is, I think in our society and with our children, the more challenging issue is the biologic and physical maturity, right? So, we live in a society where, this is not, we're all adults here, right? A majority of children in high school, a majority are having sexual relations, right? They are teaching birth control to fifth graders. So we're living in a society where our kids, as you said, are reaching biologic maturity at this age, but and this is opening up a huge can of worms, but I think it's so important. What is the outlet for these children when they're surrounded in a society that's doing it in an unhalal manner? What are you supposed to do? Put your head in the sand and pretend that this isn't happening when they're seeing it every single day between the ages of 11 and the time they get married? And as like you said, the retardation of this is, when are our kids getting married? 26, right. 27, 28, when they're done, their 14th degree in college. And, so that I think is even a much more pressing matter, with our children.
It is. It is a very pressing matter. And matter of fact, I will, inshallah, I guess maybe next time we meet, we can also continue that subject, because there's a lot that I have to say about that. Just taking into consideration both the society we live in and the Sharia, we do have answers. Those answers may not always be the things we want to hear, but they are there and they are practical. So really the answer for that is, to be frank, and again, I can go into some detail about it another time. The answer to that is that we need to marry our children younger, okay? To really think that they're gonna wait that long in this environment, especially without without falling into haram. Let me just give you an idea. According to Sharia, marriage becomes a farida when a person fears that they're going to fall into haram. And by the way, according to some of the fuqaha, like Ibn Abidin, rahimahullah ta'ala, the haram is not just the actual act, it's even with your sight. Meaning, if you feel that without marriage, you're not going to be able to control your gaze and you're going to look at things that are haram too, that's the same thing. Just imagine. So what that means in essence is this kind of almost like an obligation on everybody who lives in this country, that when they need to get married, they need to get married. Now, again, you have this issue. People are in school, they're going to school, and they may not be able to take care of a family, right, quite yet, but you can still get married. Maybe that's what I'll talk about in some detail. You can still get married, and you have to talk about this subject also frankly too, amongst yourselves, amongst your children. You need to understand what the Islamic morals and ethics are. Islam does not disparage at all what they call the birds and the bees, or the fact that you biologically, naturally, you have this need. In fact, in some ways, you can say Islam even encourages it. Rasulullah said, "Tanakahu," like you should marry and have lots of children. In other words, like it's almost encouraged in our deen. But of course, there's parameters, and basically the parameters that are in Sharia are the same as what you'll see everything else here, is that you can fulfill your natural need, but nobody should be abused in the meantime. Especially really, if you really want to get down to the nitty gritty. And again, since you said like we're all mature here and we're adults, so should be able to talk about this. The ulama have explained, who study the Sharia deeply, and it's what's called the qawaid, or even you can say maqasid, that the Sharia not only are laws and set of laws, but they have their own purposes. And in essence, zina, okay, let me put it this way, zina, as they have put it, in and of itself, is not necessarily a bad act. And I want you to listen to very maturely to this. Okay, zina, in and of itself, is not necessarily evil or bad or immoral. It's the results of zina that are immoral. In other words, that at the occasion which is very real. Even in modern times, no matter how many preventatives you want to use, there's still a very high chance of, for instance, children, pregnancy. In the event of pregnancy in children, then what happens as a result of zina is there is a lack of attention being given to the children who are born out of wedlock, to put it simply. So what are they saying? They're saying the act itself is not what the Sharia disparages. It's the fact that it can lead to this. It can lead to children whom nobody takes responsibility for. And that is very harmful to society, ultimately. Does everyone understand that point? So for that reason, marriage in Islam can be as simple at times of just having two witnesses. Why do you need witnesses? Because it should be known who the parents are. To be frankly speaking, if you just break down the Sharia to its bare minimum, it should be known who the parents are so that the people who are responsible for those children take care of those children. Okay, that's the point of the Sharia, that you don't want a society where nobody takes responsibility. Even these ayat, this is what qiyam means. That's what I was going to say. Is qiyam literally means to take responsibility of something or somebody. As Allah is al-qayyum, he has the responsibility, if you were to put that way, but he maintains all things in existence. So the person who's qiyam, which is later on also the same type of word is used, al-rijal qawwamuna 'ala an-nisa, which means men are the maintainers of women, meaning that they have the responsibility to take care of their wives. Okay, that's what it literally means. They have the responsibility to maintain and take care of their wives. So everyone needs to take care of each other. And as we said in the beginning of the surah, especially for those elements of society who are weaker for whatever reason, because they don't have, in this case, the maturity to take care of money. You are their maintainers, you take care of them, you make sure that you take care of them well. People are orphans. That's why they were the first one mentioned. And in this case, in marriage, when you take a wife, because of those things that happen as a woman, pregnancy and every other thing, now you're responsible to maintain her. Okay, so here's the thing. Everyone needs to take care of each other, but those who have been given a certain position, this is why they say they have a daraja, is you've been given that position because you have to maintain and take care of other people. That is the primary reason. In fact, it even says it even clearer in Surah An Nisa, because you spend your wealth on them. That's why you have the position, right? So basically, the point I was making about that, again, is that zina in and of itself, according to the ulama who study this issue, it's not the act itself, it's the result of it. That if no one is taking care of or taking responsibility of what could come out of zina, which will happen, is children, right? Then there is a big problem that creates for society. So the Sharia prescribes a wedge. And again, the lowest level of the wedge is to have witnesses. Why? Because that's the same point. The community has to know that these two are together. And also not just that, so that if there are children, there is automatically by the Sharia a safeguard from those children being neglected. That's the primary reason. As far as what we're concerned with here, the problem is twofold. One is, like you said, they are exposed to things, which is interesting because this is maybe a little bit more psychological, but the funny thing about what we do in this society, especially as Muslims, because we're telling them you can't get married until you finish college and then who knows, another degree, and right? But they're exposed to these things at a very early age. But they're exposed to them, to adult issues biologically, but they're not able to think or behave like adults mentally, especially with issues like this, so taking care of themselves, being able to take care of another family, like them, their children. They're not even close to it. So the result is, it's almost as if when you do that, I hope this makes sense to everyone, and I hope I can also find what this phenomena is called, psychologically speaking. You expose people to mature issues before they're mature. The result of it is they never become mature, if that makes sense. The result of that is they never become mature. So you expose these children to their lower desires and shahwa, which are natural, by the way, at that age. By the time they're 12 and 13, the biological things start to kick in. So it's natural, but you expose it to them, but then you don't want them to be men or women, meaning you don't also train them to become mature enough to understand what those desires entail. That it's not just to enjoy yourself. yes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you a natural urge and there is pleasure behind it, but there's also this biological reality behind it too, which is that children come, right? So they can't, they're caught between this rock and a hard place. They don't really understand what's going on. You should do acts that result in children coming into the world, but you're not mature enough to do that. It's like this paradox. And what you create is, again, like this eternal, like this stage of eternal childhood where they're thinking about mature things, but they can't be mature people. It's a mess. So we almost have to reinvent the whole wheel. Now, obviously, we can't just drop out of society completely. You have to deal with it now. You're here, we're here, but you have to reinvent the wheel in such that you have to be innovative enough to think about, in this context, how can I try to install a more Islamic, if you will, lifestyle in our children, and in these issues especially. So definitely early marriage has to be encouraged and it has to be facilitated. And there are ways to do that. I will talk about that in like practical ways, not just something you just say in a khutbah, but there are ways to do that. All right. Second thing is that you also need to talk about your children more often with this. I know a parent would be very uncomfortable to open this conversation with their child about it, or about this subject, but they need to be able to speak to somebody, right, who can tell them that, yes, in Islam, yes, we have haya. All right. Every deen has its characteristic, its marked, its salient characteristic, and ours, as the Prophet ﷺ said, is haya, it is modesty. Modesty, though, is not the same thing as being ignorant or unaware. Modesty actually means in Arabic a sense of shame one has in not doing anything less than what's expected of them. That's actually the literal meaning of modesty, or haya in Arabic. It's a sense of shame that you have if you are not doing anything less than what is expected. So a modest person may have human desires, but they won't act on them when it's inappropriate because of the shame they feel of doing something they know they have no business doing. They should be better than that. That's what modesty means. So why I'm saying that is, modesty does not mean like sometimes we see ma'soom bache, right? Like they don't even think about that things. Grow up. That you know they're thinking about those things. I don't even want to talk about it biologically. According to some, you know how many times a young boy thinks about these, and a man, even grown men, by the way, it's like almost 70 times or more a day in one day. This is just how we're made. Allah Ta'ala created this way because of procreation of the species. Look at the beginning of Surah An Nisa. That's the reality, right? So it's in their mind, whether you like it or not. They are thinking about it. Don't assume ma'soom bache means like modesty means like they never thought about this before. They do. Are they interested? Yes, they are. Let's just be frank. As adults, again, let's be honest. They are interested. But modesty would mean that even though if they have that, which they do, if they're really biologically functioning, sometimes people have low drives because honestly, they're not physically healthy. But if they're physically healthy, male or female, it applies to women too. I know that's another taboo subject, and that's a very, again, from modesty perspective, no one said, but both male and female have these desires. They're there, they do think about it, and it does happen. Modesty would be that a person does have those desires and they are interested, but they are ashamed to do anything less than what is expected of them. So don't think that, not even for ourselves, but especially for your children, that this issue is not there. Of course, they're thinking about it. Of course, they're interested. But if they're trained right, then they're ready to say, within the limits that Allah has prescribed, I'm content. That's haya. Okay, yes, I'm a human being. I have a need. I'm interested, but I also have enough modesty, haya, to say that there's a prescribed limit. That takes training too. Part of that training is to let them know that in our deen, we do recognize this. We're not that modest to us to think that, we shouldn't even speak about it. Or that, again, we have this assumption that, a good Muslim doesn't even think about these things. I don't know where you think Muslims come from. We are different because we have Iman, and that is a very special thing that only Allah gives whom He wants. But as far as the other aspects of being a human, you're no different than anyone else. We didn't come from Mars or something like that, right? Or we're not malaika. We are human beings. This part of us, I mean, if you really want to joke about it, it may even be more. because Muslim populations are definitely, we have a lot more children than non-Muslims, right? So apparently there's something that about us that may be even more so than everyone else. So we are human. It's there. It's a reality. You can't escape it by just ignoring it. But as a parent, you may not be able to speak to them directly about it, no problem. But you should find people and know people in the community who are, you're comfortable with their level of deen and knowledge, and they're able to speak to your children, whoever they're comfortable with too, about those issues, frankly, because they have to have in themselves. As a parent, you can't do that. You can't control what they do in and or out of closed doors. But if they're instilled with this idea of haya, as it truly is, not that you're not human, you don't have the desire or you don't have the interest, but you have a certain amount of moral conduct that you have chosen to do. See, remember, deen is something that a person, as even according to the definition of deen, according to some ulama, that it is something that people, bi-ikhtiyarihim al-mahmud, that people choose to do by their own volition. You understand that the part of the definition of deen, it is something that you choose, bi-ikhtiyarihim al-mahmud. It is your own personal choice that you're following down this path. Sirat al-mustaqim. It's not something that was just forced upon you. You of your own volition decided, I am willingly going to try and obey Allah. That's the person that we want to make sure our children are. And when they do that, they say that what is haya? It's not that I don't think about these things or I'm not interested, but I have a certain moral code that I have chosen for myself. And I would be embarrassed to basically do anything less than what is expected of me when I chose that code. That's a value you have to instill. But in the meantime, what our job is, so subhanAllah, I'll continue this subject because this is a very important subject. So anyone who got mad, maybe we got off of this ayah, but this is very important. Our job though, all right, that's one thing, raising them to instill these values, is to also make it easy. It's kind of scary. And again, there's some weakness in this hadith, but it's, again, the meaning is sound, that basically if a child reaches maturity, they become baligh, in other words, they hit puberty, they have this biological need. If they fall into haram, the fault actually goes on the parents. Some of us may be thinking that's not fair. The reason for this is because the parent is considered, when they have parents, the wali. Okay, what does the wali mean in Islamic law? The wali, literally a wali is someone who takes care of your interests when you're not there. That's the literal meaning of a wali. Right? That's why Allah is waliyul ladina amanu. Allah is the protecting friend of those who believe, meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes care of our interests where we're not able to, and really in reality everything. But the point being is, a wali is one who takes care of your interests, right, when you're not able to. The idea is, in an Islamic society, because we don't allow dating, for instance, and that's another issue that has to be brought up, how are they going to find, now they have this need, where are they going to find a partner? If they can't date, that means that who's going to take care of their interests in their, right, when they can't do it themselves? Technically, it's supposed to be the father, if he's there, right? So he should be smart enough to know that, okay, regardless of how I feel, my child is at this age, you should automatically assume, whether they're addressing this issue with you or not, yeah, they're interested. Biologically, they're at that age, they have the interest, it's there. Even if I want to ignore it, how do I try to address it? If I don't care about it and I ignore it, even when the signs are there, and I say, oh, no, he's a ma'soom bache, don't worry about it, he'll be fine, right? And you make them wait for that long. If they happen to do something wrong, it's actually going to go on your record, right? Because you weren't smart enough to say, okay, like the reality is, no matter what, they have this desire, they have this need, they have this interest. I need to address it somehow. That means also, if you need to speak to your kids, maybe not about the whole subject, but about that issue, okay, what about marriage? What about dating, right? Where are you with all this? Because I want to make sure that we take care of this need in the proper way. So maybe next
Mom,
time.
you know, there's an easy out for that father of
Yeah.
of those daughters. And the easy out is, Oh, what are you talking about? I need to get my daughter educated. I need to get her in college. So family and having kids and getting married gets pushed to the back burner. And that, I think, mentally is just an easy, the society we live in. And I think a lot of this is from our parents' generation, to be honest with you. Parents that have come from Pakistan, where now it's the flip, especially in our girls. There's such an emphasis now on education, right?
Right.
What's the average age of a girl getting married in the United States of Pakistani origin? 28, 29?
It really
How many
is.
30-year-old girls I know? And it's the same for
Mhm.
guys. I'm not singling out girls or Pakistanis, but look, it's a fact. But how do we deal with that? When you ask that father, and I'm going to be that father in 7 or 8 years,
Yeah.
how do you tell that father that no, this you're looking at it the wrong way? This needs to be the emphasis. But
Right.
his response is going to be, well, look at all the girls that are divorced and now left on their own. And if they have no education, what are they going to end up? What are they going to fall back on?
Well, that's part of what I was going to address. Now, mind you, of course, that the thing is that this is only one suggestion out of many. And as long as we have the right intention, that should be said from the outset. If we have the right intention to do this for the sake of Allah and to protect our families from haram, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will definitely make a way for us. This is the meaning of the ayat, وَمَن يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْهُ مَخْرَجًا وَيَرْزُقْهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْتَسِبُ. If you have taqwa, meaning if we make our intention right now that the primary concern should be saving ourselves and our children from haram, if you make that your goal, your taqwa, Allah will make a way out for you. This is the promise of Allah. He will create something for you, some situation, or put that bright idea in your head that will be a makhraj, meaning he'll create the ways where you can find a solution. So there shouldn't be any excuse that it's impossible or no, we're expected to do this. No, it can be possible. You have to change your attitude. That's the first. I have to say that at the outset, it is possible. It can happen. Allah will make it, but you have to change your attitude. If you're foolish enough to think, and I'm sorry, I've been working, it is the mindset. It's very critical, and we have to strive for that first. But if you have the typical mindset, which I dealt with for more than decades now, which is that your children are so innocent and they're not going to do anything wrong, and they're going to wait until they're 30, that's a joke. No offense, they are doing things that are wrong. I'm just being frank. I've worked in the communities long enough to see where people would come to imams, like they come to the Catholic priest, like the confession box. I've heard it all, and I've seen it all. Don't assume because they're waiting that long that nothing's happening, unfortunately. I'm just going to be very honest about that. But here's the thing. The solution is there if you change your mindset and say taqwa is primary. The fear of Allah is primary. It's the most important thing. The fear of falling into haram is important. Allah will make a way out. Now, my point is this. First of all, you have to look at the Sharia whole in its whole. Who said that if you get married, you have to start making babies immediately? Forgive me for saying that. Who said that?
Yeah, that's a good point.
You understand?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a
They don't
good.
even really, honestly, I can show you in Sharia where they don't even have to be living together in the beginning. Even just the idea that while they're in college, for instance, they had this idea that there's someone that my parents, as an example, have found for me. We're going to get married. And now I can at least think about that I have an outlet. I don't have to worry until I get 30, right? There's someone there. I found someone, boy or girl. So who said that because your girl got married, she can't finish her college education? That's in itself a false, you're putting impediments yourself. Why? Right? Because being married doesn't mean you have to have children immediately, actually. To be honest with you, I'm just being, again, very frank, according to Sharia. So that's another attitude that we have to change, because that's immediately what people start assuming. Because we don't talk about the general issue, which primarily is what? People have an urge biologically, right? We automatically assume many traditional Muslim societies that the only purpose of marriage is children, and that's not true. Originally, the purpose of marriage is to protect you from haram. Children come as a result of that, right? Later on, or when you're ready in this case. You don't have to start having children when you don't have, again, financial stability. That's no problem. Actually, literally in Sharia, I can show you the fatwa that is no problem. If you don't want children because of that issue, in fact, the only one who has a say over that is the woman, which is if the man wants to use protection or whatever, forgive me if you're being very frank, like any type of prevention measures, he has to get permission from his wife. So it's actually the woman's choice in this case. If she says that, okay, I want to finish my education, no children, that's it. But at least they're married, so that everything now, that need is taken care of. You don't have to worry about them doing haram. They don't have to worry about it. They don't have to think that it's not going to be until I'm 30. Who said that they can't get an education to be married? You see what I'm saying? So there are ways.
That's a good point, Imam, but I'm just thinking about the practicality of that a little bit. If you take a 21-year-old kid and get that boy married and say a little bit of a long distance relationship, right? Say
Right.
boys in Pennsylvania and the girls in Chicago. And
Right.
now that boy goes off to college. Are you potentially putting him at, because look, the fact of the matter is, look, I think I'm one of the few people here that was born and raised in this country. College is an absolute meat market.
It is. It is.
100%. And
Yeah.
I went to college in a time where it wasn't the swipe of a finger to get you involved in haram, and now it is. I mean, it's the easiest thing in the world.
Right.
Aren't you maybe setting that kid up for potentially more haram now that he's for a 20-year-old? I mean, does a 20-year-old understand the importance of marriage and now how you're locked in and everything that you do outside of marriage is even to a higher extent than if, obviously haram
If
is
you
haram.
weren't married, yeah, obviously. It's more of a bigger of a deal to do that when you're married than it is when you're not.
Yeah,
That
that
comes
is my point.
right. So that comes to the earlier point that I was trying to make, is that there has to be a certain amount of maturity that we train our children with while they're still teenagers. All right, because that is between them and Allah. Okay, like they have to be from their own mature, level of maturity and moral code. They have to be able to understand that, right? And that comes, through training while they're young. Actually, to be honest with you, and that's why I meant earlier about, and you may not think it's connected, but it is. Even just to give that child chores, part-time job, right? That's going to develop in them a certain amount of maturity that hopefully by that age they can think like a grown man. You understand?
That's a scary point, Imam, because I think the point you're making is if you're trying to inculcate in your child while you're driving them to college, it's way too late. This literally needs to, and that's the scary thing, I think, for parents. This needs to start when they're 7, 8, 9. Not when they're, the cat's out of the bag and stuff like that. And unless you start it very, very early and build that strong will in that child, because I'm telling you, it takes a very strong will when you're in high school and college to avoid this stuff. And unless that kid has that foundation, unfortunately, they're going to get eaten alive. And
Yeah.
it really does need to start early.
Yeah.
And I hate to say this again, I say it all the time. 2.5 hours on a Sunday is not enough.
No, it's not. It's not. That's definitely not enough. And especially because there's no way that they actually address these issues in those 2.5 hours anyhow. What's the best education that we give them during the 2.5 hours on a Sunday is that we teach them how to read Quran at a rudimentary level, at least batatha, and we teach them the stories of the prophets. That's like usually what happens, right? That's not, it's not even close. And really the hardest pill, I think, to swallow for all of us here, because all of us are parents, the hardest pill to swallow really is that it's our responsibility. Right? The ball has been passed to us as parents, that it's your responsibility. And part of that responsibility is making sure they get a better education than Sunday school Islam. And also, to be honest, even beyond education, it has to come from what they see in us. Okay. And that also comes in the things that we tell them are important. If we never bring up the subject and we never address it maturely and honestly, then they're going to think that, you just wipe these things under the rug, and the only thing that's going to keep my parents happy is if I have a good career, right? That's usually what they're emphasizing, and making them good amount of money and being independent. There's nothing wrong with that. We just began by saying that earning is an obligation for some, and that wealth and how you spend it is how, a society runs. So obviously they need to have careers and so forth and so on, but that should never be the priority, meaning that they should be taught alongside with this. The most important priority in your life is taqwa. Okay, it is to make sure that we're doing what we can to keep Allah pleased and stay within His boundaries. تلك حدود الله فلا تعدوها فلا تعدوها فلا تعدوها. Don't pass these boundaries, and that burden lies on us. We can't even expect, really unfairly, as I must say, as a former imam, we unfairly expect imams to do that. Imams are not like magic workers. They don't come and like reform your children to become like overnight Sufis, as they call them. Like that's also a fallacy. That's not going to happen. If you're expecting that, you're going to be another big disappointment, and it's unfair on the imam too. He's not their parents. He can't do that. He can teach them their deen, and he can try to be an example. But those morals actually come from, I'll put it to you this way, as Imam al-Bukhari had related in his book Al-Adab al-Mufrad, which is separate from his Sahih, that the Sahaba as a group, radiyallahu ta'ala anhum ajma'in, used to say that the character, the moral fiber of the child is the responsibility of the parent. When that child grows up and they decide to do whatever they do, that's between them and Allah. But while they're children and they're under your tutelage and under your guidance, the moral fiber and character of that child, whether you like it or not, is that ball has been handed to us. It's in our court. We have that responsibility. We have to instill in them those values. And if it's not done, then you have no one to blame but yourself. And really the only thing you can do is two things after that. Ask Allah to forgive us, and then make dua to Allah that Allah, I have failed. You have to, I'm not saying anyone in particular, I'm just saying in general, we have to say this in our dua. Ya Allah, I have failed as a parent. Where I have failed as a parent, I'm begging you to take care of my children. Meaning that if I fail to give them that moral fiber and upbringing, then please you guide them. And that's not impossible. Allah Ta'ala can guide people who were much worse than our children may or may not be. Much worse. So that's not impossible. But if you haven't felt that you lived up to your responsibility as a parent to do that, then this is how you have to be humble enough to say that in your dua. Literally, Ya Allah, forgive me for my failures as a parent, and you take care of my children where I wasn't able to.
And even pray for Allah to make it easy. The reason I'll tell you why I've gotten a little bit fired up about this, there's another layer of nonsense we're going to have to deal with. So this is off topic, but it's very much on topic. I saw a commercial the other day.
Yeah.
Of my brother sent it to me, of a shampoo commercial. And it is two lesbian women. They're in their mid-30s. And they're raising an 8-year-old boy. This is a shampoo commercial that's going to be on mainstream. Get used to it. It's going to be put into all your Disney movies, where the 8-year-old boy is through the overseeing of her parents is transitioning into a girl.
Allah.
And I was watching the mainstream commercial. I was watching this commercial and I was confused. This was a very attractive boy, and he had this long hair and it was dyed now purple. And the two parents are behind him. And the mother says one of the scariest sentences I've ever heard. These are two lesbian mothers. Yeah. And the mother says, when he finally grew out his hair, this is a boy, it was the first time I ever saw him. This is what your kids are going to be dealing with. This isn't at 11:30 p.m. on Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, this is mainstream.
This is 3:30 in between Mulana or whatever the heck the kids are watching these days.
Right. Yo, no doubt. I don't want to put a scare tactic in everyone, but to be honest with you, this is already what's being told to certain kids in certain schools, in grade school, by the way. It's so scary now. I don't want to get into it, but because I deal with certain organizations and people online, there's even Muslims propagating these things. I'm just being honest with you. There are Muslims propagating these things. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. This is a very real problem that we're dealing with right now. It is not obscure. It is not something that is hidden. It is in our faces. So again, we're going to have to address it, which is one of the things I've been trying to do, like I said, through different organizations online primarily, but because even amongst Muslims now, this is becoming actually an issue. If you believe it or not, there are Muslims trying to propagate all of this. I'll leave, maybe it's kind of a, I don't know if it's funny or not, but there is an answer to all this. Essentially, we have to go back and learn our aqidah and go in a little bit also into the philosophy that has led to all of these things. Why are they changing so drastically as a society here in the West, for instance, that now this stuff is becoming normal? There is a philosophy behind it, and it's good to study it because really the foundations of this philosophy is very easy to disprove the things that they believe in and the things that they hold as ethics and values, especially with this issue. I'll just give you an example, and it's kind of a funny joke, maybe lighten up some of it. Some of the reason why this is the issue now, this whole thing about gender, is because they're following certain ideologies and philosophies, which basically the essence of it is they claim that gender, literally, I'm not joking, they say it's a social construct, meaning that gender has no real reality. It's just something that we construct socially to keep certain people in power. That's their literal definition of it. There's a lot of feedback, and by the way, there's a lot of people getting sick of this in the Western world as well, non-Muslims, and because obviously it's a biological reality. It's not a social construct. I didn't just make this up so I, as a man, can keep my power. Like, this is an actual physical, biological reality. It's not a construct. So the thing that's funny about these people, I made a joke about it. I was talking to my wife, and like, it's like, okay, since gender is just made up, it's a social construct, why would you want to change it to the opposite gender? Isn't that part of the social construct? If you want to change yourself, why don't you just become nothing? Neither man nor woman. Why don't you just become a vegetable, right? Or something, you understand? Like, if it's just a social construct that's all just made up, and that's so why be original then? Don't become a woman, just become, I don't know, a thing, and it. That's how crazy this stuff is. But the fact is that, crazy or not, it is here in front of us. So it is our responsibility to have an answer and to hold on to it. So if you are interested in that, I can bring all that up too. Like, what is the Islamic response to it? And also what you do have to study somewhat too. What is the philosophy that created all this nonsense to begin with? How did even Western society get to the point where all of these things became, the norm? So it is important because, like you said, it's not just, unfortunately and regretfully, I had to say this, it's not just the fact that it's on daytime TV commercials and children's programs. It's the fact that there are even Muslims now. And there's even in this community, I don't want to give name, there's certain places where there are Muslims now pushing this agenda. It's very dangerous time. So we do have to address it openly, and it's in front of us. You can no longer ignore it. Haya, again, does not mean ignoring things. It just simply means not doing, being ashamed of not doing anything less than what is expected of you. So I think that in the times coming, we can address all these things, inshallah, if you're willing, and if everyone is willing, inshallah.
It's amazing, Imam, how genius, or what I don't know, genius isn't the right word. If you would have shown your parents this commercial, right? Just the two lesbians, they would have fallen off the couch.
Right.
But now that's in the background. That's normal. What are you talking about? That's completely normal. So now we're moving to the next level, and this will be it will be as normal 15 years from now as that.
Right.
To our children. That's the scary thing.
And you don't know what level. Again, something I was talking to someone about, and it's not conspiracy theory. They start off in stages, and something that they'd been talking about that is not too prominent yet, but it has been mentioned here and there, is what they call transhumanism. So the idea of transsexualism, that you can change your gender, is just the beginning, it's the tip of the iceberg. What do they mean by transhumanism? You see, it may be that they'll get to the point that, like, you just become a vegetable or something, or I don't know. You know, it's ajib, because, you know, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, that shaitan will inspire them to the point فَلَيُغَيِّرُنَّ خَلْقَ اللَّهِ, that they will try to change literally the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yeah.
We should be happy as humans, right? Because human beings, what do we say? لَقَدْ خَلَقَنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ, that humans have been given the greatest form. Humans actually carry a secret, and they are fine the way they are. That's why Islam wants to be holistic, right? We accept human beings as they are, we accept men and women as they are, and we see each one of them has a secret and a great contribution, that there doesn't need to be this فَيُغَيِّرُنَّ خَلْقَ اللَّهِ. There doesn't need to be a change. It's actually holistic, you know? And that's the problem. That's also why, if you ever notice, that people tend to care more about animals than they do human beings. This is also, that's why I said it's good to study their philosophy, because deep down, you know, deep down in the origins of Western philosophy, like Greek philosophy, there's this pessimistic idea that humans are inherently evil. That's why Christianity appealed to them so well, because of the original sin and all these ideas, that as humans, we're inherently bad. But actually, Islamically, we're saying the opposite. Humans holistically and inherently are good. If anything is wrong, it's because we change that fitrah. We change that inherent capacity to be good. There's a big difference in the worldview right there. So because they think that humans, in essence, are evil, so they want to change everything about being human. You see what I'm trying to say? It's like that's how they want to elevate themselves. That's why even their Jannah, this is another subject in itself, but you know, there's a big difference there. And maybe you've heard people talk about this before, even to try and criticize us. Our Jannah is a physical place, because it is. It shouldn't be it is. The actual Jannah, the real, it's actually physical. So you will have all these physical aspects, including gender, in Jannah. If you were a man in this world, you will be a man there. If you were a woman in this world, you will be a woman there. And you will have the physical things that you had in this world, but they will be of course, a totally different reality, but there is a physical aspect of it. Look at the Christian idea of paradise. You become pure spirit, you see? So they have this idea embedded in their minds that to be human is to be inherently evil. We don't say that. As humans, holistically, we are actually good. We can alter that fitrah, but inherently we are good. So being human is good. Being a man is good. Being a woman is good. You don't need to change that. Anyhow, khair, we can talk about these things, of course, for a while, but inshallah, next time we meet, inshallah.
All right, great. Thank you so much for joining. I'm going to end this meeting and I'll share the recording, inshallah.
Okay, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam.